Right, hello. So many people for wonderful Francis Archer. So great compliment for our speaker this morning. A very warm welcome and welcome to Breakfast with Arup. My name is Farah and I'm the Marketing and Communications Leader for Buildings London. And so to our speaker. Growing up in the wilds of the Indian Himalayas, from a young age, Francis was out from dusk to dawn playing and making. Francis spoke both Hindi with his brothers as well as a cohort of local friends. And though they all had short back and sides, he was often called a hippie by other locals, as this was the 70s, and hippies were the only other white folk that had ever been seen in the Indian Himalayas. His father was an Anglican missionary vicar, and to Francis, the truth about the world was increasingly important from an early age. Francis, first of all, disproved the fact that Father Christmas existed by forcibly staying awake to discover it was Mum who put the presents out at night. He also had ferocious arguments as to whether Jesus or Krishna ruled the world. And then at a slightly older age, he was trying to set up God, so God would have a chance of revealing himself to Francis. And Francis soon realized that he could not believe in any of the myths surrounding him in religious India, and decided that science was the only reliable route to the truths of nature. In classic Indian style, Francis learnt to swat for his exams and joined the competition, with the girls in coming top in tests and with the boys on the football field. For university, Francis moved to the UK, first to Imperial College, where he had to read maths, as he knew this was the way to the language of understanding the big question. On gaining a top maths degree, he moved to Cambridge to study a PhD in theoretical physics, in a group led by his childhood hero, Stephen Hawking. He spent his time in Princeton and in CERN in Geneva, and in completing his PhD in quantum gravity in toy two-dimensional world, he spent a year relaxing in Berlin with a postdoctoral fellowship at the Free University. Whilst raving his nights away, he realized that he was never going to make a breakthrough in physics as he had hoped, and he could relax as he now had enough confidence that the big man in the sky was not the answer to why we are all here, and decided to take a break and drive overland to India again. After 10,000 miles of driving across India and back to the Channel and back in London, he wondered what he would do 9 to 5. He'd always liked building things, and he knew he could master structural engineering. However, he suffered from many rejections as he did not have a degree in engineering. However, he finally persuaded our former chairman, Phil Dilley, that he was serious, and he finally received an offer from Arup. So, after 20 years at Arup, Francis has completed large and small projects in Europe, the Middle East, Far East, and Africa, and 4 of his proudest projects, small projects, are in the far-flung corners of the kingdom here. The Maggie Centre in Swansea, Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, and Canongate Tower at the Scottish Parliament, and also the 18-ton Serpentine Pavilion designed here in London. So, without further ado, may I introduce the very wonderful and charismatic Francis Archer. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming so early in the morning, and I'm glad that happened at the beginning and not halfway through. So beautiful it made you cry. I hope you've all brought your handkerchiefs along. You know those it's football season now, those footballers or actors who say, I'm so lucky I do what I enjoy and get paid for it. Well, I feel like that, and Arup is set up so that we all here can. We as employees own this firm, hence we decide what to do, and there's no external interference. Though perhaps you won't find it written anywhere, my modus operandi is that there are only 2 rules in Arup. Don't bring the firm into disrepute, and don't lose money. Besides this, we're free to do as we please. As described by Paul Nuttall here, our ex-building engineering leader, it so happens that in building engineering, we're a group of people who like designing buildings, and we found a formula to do so. What is it we enjoy about our work? Well, it's actually the creating of great buildings. Now, I've heard said that creating things is a fundamental need of all humans, along with more recognized needs such as food and shelter. And one sees this in the uncorrupted nature of young children, for whom making, be it drawing, making dens, Lego, or Minecraft, is the most natural form of play. The recent rise in reality TV shows based on making also recognizes this, from Grand Designs, Great British Bake Off, Sewing Bee, Pottery Throwdown, Landscape Painting, more. I love these programs as they feature amateurs with no other agenda than to make something great. What's apparent from watching these programs is the enormous power that interest and engagement can bring to making. This passion can be overwhelming and lead to tears of joy, as we saw from Keith Brymer-Jones in the Pottery Challenge last year.
Much. But who isn't potty for clay?
Why does it make you cry?
You're so nervous,
Yes.
and you've just excelled yourself. You found this a real challenge. Fantastic.
This is a good sign, by the way, when he reacts like this.
There's loads.
Many have to do this making after hours as a hobby, knitting, cooking, homemaking, but we do it at work. But it's not a given that it will be fun or interesting, and of course it's not always the case. However, what we do find is a correlation between the interest and the success, i.e. the team that most enjoyed and were most fulfilled by the work produced the best results. Hence, ensuring it is what we want to do, i.e. interesting, is a good guide to ensuring that it will be a success. So, what is a great building? The earliest surviving written work on the subject of architecture are the writings of Roman architect Vitruvius from the early 1st century AD. According to him, a good building should satisfy the three principles of firmitas, utilitas, and venustas, usually translated as durability, utility, and beauty. So if we wanted to be quantitative, we might, with appropriate weightings, write greatness equals durability times utility times beauty. Note that the multiplication is one way of valuing all three. You can't bypass one of these by just having more of the others. How does this compare with what our clients want, usually described as value, often expressed as better, faster, cheaper? Better is likely to involve the Vitruvian triple, but clearly time and money are also important. Now, I see lots of emphasis in Arup on faster, cheaper, utility, durability, but beauty is not discussed much. Engineers are typically uncomfortable with the word, as we can't measure it or define it, though to a greater or lesser degree we do recognize it when we see it. However, we all know that one cannot get to a design without much subjective choice making. And if we don't make these carefully, we end up with at best a mediocre building, at worst a real mess. Typically on buildings, we engineers leave these issues to the architect. But if buildings really interest us, we cannot be satisfied by this. And I think all involved need to have some understanding of what might constitute a beautiful building. Now, I have read little on the philosophy of aesthetics, know very little about art, and so I'm completely unqualified to talk about beauty. But I'm going to have a go. Please see this for what it is. Me trying to grapple with something I've been working around as a building engineer for 20 years. I'll almost certainly make false generalizations, and will probably disagree with what I say tomorrow. But I think having beauty on the agenda is the important thing. So my provocative question for us today is, can an engineer create beauty that will make you cry? One could say this is a strange question, as over the ages, many beautiful things have been created by engineers. But perception of engineering in the UK is at a bit of a low. And many would think of tears of frustration rather than joy. This could have been IT, of course. Joy when thinking of engineers. So before any sort of attempt at defining beauty, let's play devil's advocate and test if in the context of buildings at least, it exists at all. We do this by asking how independent or interdependent Vitruvius's durability, utility, and beauty are. We can ask, can I have a durable building that has poor utility? Almost certainly yes. Can we have a building whose utility is near perfect, but not durable? Certainly. Remember, durability here is anything to do with longevity. So durability and utility would seem to be independent. But can its utility be near perfect, but have none of the qualities of beauty? Some would say yes, but others might say that the perfect utility is itself beauty. I'm afraid I side with the yes. This simple knife, fork, and spoon example would suggest this. When I get cutlery from different sets out at home, I get telling off from my architect wife. And my argument that they work fine just doesn't fly. This picture shows an example in architecture, a view of one of London's most recent big developments, which I'm sure had planners, architects, engineers all over it. And each component probably functions very well, but aesthetically pleasing, afraid it's not. Perhaps a more difficult combination is, can it be beautiful but have poor utility? The answer is possibly yes, if I do not yet know about its poor utility. But when I find this out, my appreciation of its beauty might reduce. In this happy example, only to be reinstated again, with its utility reinstated. So because of the fact that beauty is in the mind of the beholder, it can't be completely independent of other qualities. But because the imagination of the human mind has no limit, we can always do better than perfectly describable utility and robustness. And I think it's this better that has something to do with beauty. So now we're sure it really is something of interest to buildings, relevance to buildings, we need to try and understand a little more about what this elusive thing might be. Without trying to define it definitively, there are some common characteristics across things that people consider beautiful. Now, the word coherent makes no sense for me in describing beauty, because it can describe beauty in all the varied uses of this word across the many disciplines, from visual arts to music, ideas, and more. E.g. the physical coherence of, say, a geometry of a drawing, or the frequencies of a musical score, or the intellectual and emotional coherence of a scientific explanation, or a political idea, or an author's story. In each case, if one sees beauty in it, then it is in some way making sense, i.e. coherent. But coherence is not enough, as a most dull design may be perfectly coherent. In addition, the perceiver needs to find it somehow interesting, as otherwise any beauty perceived will be very brief at least. Now, mathematical proof is by definition coherent, but is only of interest to someone who can understand it. So we each see beauty in different things. I had to fit in a clip from my favorite ever Horizon documentary on Fermat's last theorem.
At the beginning of September, I was sitting here at this desk when suddenly, totally unexpectedly, I had this incredible revelation. It was the most important moment of my working life. Nothing I ever do again will. Sorry.
So Professor Andrew Wiles here had spent 7 years secretly working on this 300-year-old conundrum, which all the best mathematicians have looked at over that period and failed. That such an abstract idea with absolutely no purpose can bring such emotional engagement tells us something about the power of being interested and the beauty of this. I read a news article last month about an embryo-growing research breakthrough. Professor Madlena Zernicka-Goetz at the University of Cambridge said she could not remember being more happy than succeeding in growing these embryos. So happiness and beauty clearly related to achievement as well as interest. Happiest moment of my life? Wedding? No. Birth of first child? No. Proving that there are no integer solutions to x cubed plus y cubed equals z cubed? Yes. Or succeeded in growing an embryo in a test tube? Yes. So how best aim for beauty in our creations? This is a question that an artist usually does not want to or feels unable to answer. I think this is okay because for an individual artist, as long as they have an interesting story or an intriguing idea to convey, and possibly also a technical ability in some sort of communication channel like drawing, it's their single-minded authorship that almost guarantees coherence. How good the art is depends on how interesting the story or intriguing the idea, as well as how well they convey it. Now, it's not so straightforward for something that requires a team to design, as the easiest way to lose coherence is to have disparate elements. Now, in my 20 years of practice, I see two models for a building design team. In both models, the architect, trained as an all-rounder in both the soft subjects of human behavior as well as the harder technical subjects, is the design team leader. However, how the teams work differ greatly. So, model one, the architect sees the design as very much their personal vision, or perhaps like the artist, they do not feel able to articulate it. They see no need or are unable to share this vision with the wider design team of architects and engineers from whom they want hard facts, information, options from which they choose the answer. In this model, coherence and hence beauty can result from the master designer controlling all the key decisions and hence ensuring integrity of vision. This sole author model works fine, and its well-defined roles is prone to less of the psychological and political problems of the alternative collaborative model, but also misses out on some of the opportunities that can bring. I think that model one, away from buildings, is a team model appropriate possibly when working with an artist, such as this piece I did with Paul Coxedge. Here the structural engineer's tasks can be kept in a tidy box out of which they need not venture. buildings are much more complex, and there's much scope for interesting things to happen in the overlap and interplay between disciplines. So model 2 is the collaborative model. Here the design lead shares and builds the vision with a core cross-disciplinary team and looks for both critique of this vision and discipline solutions that might enhance it. This collaboration does not necessarily mean equal ownership or credit, but does mean that all key disciplines understand the vision and have empathy with it and with their collaborators. Here, each discipline reaches beyond their silo to both understand and contribute. This model obviously requires mutual respect, empathy, understanding of the vision, and demands a high level of engagement and commitment. So what do I mean by this design vision? Firstly, it's definitely not the brief, but something that sits parallel to the brief. The brief is a definitive set of properties that the end result must have to achieve its utility and robustness. But the design vision is all about how to choose from the myriad of possible end results that could meet the brief. At its crudest, this is just the conscious or even subconscious goings-on in the mind of the author. But in a collaborative design, it needs articulation and communication. It is the designer's answer to what is this project all about, including ambitions, interests, opportunities beyond the brief. But beyond these words, it also needs a leap of faith, a jump in the dark, an actual proposal developed just enough to show the potential for an exploratory journey with the client. Now, it's common in design competitions for a client, along with the brief, to supply their ambitions and only ask for a proposal. We, of course, know that the best way to win is for the designer to both question some aspects of the brief and of the client's ambitions and vision, and to break a few rules when supplying our vision and proposal. This is essential, as the team must believe in and be interested in the project in order to make a convincing case for their proposal. As in art, there are many techniques, types of vision. With regard to aesthetics, there seem to be two routes taken. Those that have a strong preconceived idea of the end result, looks like a planting pot, petals of a flower, blade of light, in the fashion of Palladio. Here, aiming for and homing in on this goal provides the coherence, hence beauty. Or those where the vision includes no preconceived idea of the result, but simply describes a particular way of making decisions. I do the right thing for reinforced concrete, show it. Or use a particular modular system in a consistent way and be guided by the functional brief. Here, coherence is supplied by the rules, and the beauty is a resultant phenomena of the rules. Of course, in most cases, the working vision has a bit of both of these. It's near impossible to have zero preconceived idea of what it will end up looking like, and the perfect preconceived idea is always influenced by the final choice of system building materials. However, it is true that in any creative process, you cannot know beforehand what the result will be. So even a preconceived image is usually used as a guide or inspiration rather than a literal image. I fear there's a worrying recent trend in architecture caused by our new technologies, whereby clients are asking for a photoreal image of the end result before deciding even to employ you as a team, typically during a competition. This trend has the risk of stifling the creative process and boxing one in on an image created far too early in the process. The vision can build up over time and even have its own design process, or be hierarchical, but at any stage it must be broad, flexible, and vague enough to be applicable across the project and scale, and yet be tight and definitive enough to actually guide decisions. So some quick examples of design vision from my direct experience, starting with the bridge. The garden bridge, one could say, is a preconceived aesthetic. The design vision is of two giant bronze planters emerging from the river, spreading in all directions, floating over the landing points, and kissing at mid-river. This vision is ideal to symbolize and realize a raised garden. It is very easily read for what it is and gives the garden prominence. The geometry of individual shoots growing, radiating out in all directions to create a whole is both horticultural in theme and practical in fenestration, and seen in much of Thomas's work. This guided all sorts of decisions from edge condition to planting strategy to structural materials, landing conditions, mid-span conditions. My second example is from Arnhem Central Transport Hub. Here at the highest level, the design vision involves the geometric representation of the brief in the form of what Ben van Berkel describes as box to blob idea. This is the idea of a smooth transition from a regular orthogonal geometry as required by a specific function, such as a theater or car parking at one end of a building, to a much freer geometry at the other end, where people movements and other criteria having no need for relationship with an orthogonal grid. The pre-concept proposal became one of raking support walls and floor plates in the car park, morphing into a single smooth surface, defining floors, walls, and roof, with no distinct threshold between these. My third example is a Giant's Causeway Visitor Centre. The design vision was for a building and landscape to be one, with a simple fold up to be the building and a fold down in the landscape to be the car park. Two other ingredients completed the vision: a very strict geometric grid set up with rules on precise relationship between all elements, and a limited palette of materials. Wherever possible, these being the base structural material with no finishes added. Now, in all three examples, the vision was articulated and communicated to the wider team, and significant parts of the developed design were conceived by the wider team. There's always a long way to go from a design vision to a design ready for construction. The overarching ideas in a design vision should guide all the local individual decisions needed when there are a myriad of possibilities open. This obviously becomes all the more important on very large projects where there are many minds having to make decisions all the time. It can help to use the design vision to develop a set of principles or protocols as a guide. The simpler the vision, the smaller the set of principles or protocols, and the greater the ease of achieving coherence. So, to summarize my hypothesis, beauty comes about because of the interesting or intriguing nature of the design vision combined with coherence in the executed result. So the design vision is a guide to a set of principles or rules whose consistent application implies perceptible coherence in the end result, which reads as beauty in the interested mind. Note that if all these decisions and designs can be done by a single person, then the intermediate steps drop away and the design vision never needs articulation. But in a building, the intermediate steps can be useful, suggesting. Now, it's interesting to note that in nature's designs, the rules are basically the laws of nature, whose strict application results in the design. Coherence is guaranteed by the interesting fact that there seem to be laws of nature, and interesting is guaranteed by the fact that it's our world. So is all this just for iconic projects, or does this apply to regular high street buildings? We're aware in Arup that some clients feel we overcomplicate things when they want as a building. I think that project vision stage, and project vision is even more important in regular everyday buildings than iconic ones. For it's in this project vision stage that the client and design team must ensure they're on the same page. Beauty, however, is always important. It does not require added complication, nor added risk, nor added cost. In fact, it should be the opposite and simplify all of these. However, what it does require is added care, interest, and enthusiasm. And which client wants their design team not to care about the end result? So why are so many of our buildings lacking in beauty, and how might we do better? Let's first think about what is needed in a design team. Creativity to open up and imagine what might be possible. Experience and knowledge to close in and highlight risks and ensure the chosen route is possible. Wisdom to see the big picture and balance all the competing aims. And a bit of hard graft to see it through. So can we do better? I think, if I have a message, it's really for all involved, clients, architects, and engineers. If we really believe in the collaborative process and that a team can be greater than the sum of its parts, we must take great care in the choice of these teams. Success is completely dependent on this. And by this I mean on the individuals, not on the firms. But for the most important stage, setting the project vision, this can be a small core team, possibly just architect, one or two engineers, plus ideally the client. We must ask, can this team work together in a collaborative way? Is there a history to prove this? Is there empathy? Are there mutual respect? Is there a hidden agenda? Are there complementary capabilities within the team? Not just complementary knowledge, i.e. the right disciplines, but complementary levels of creativity versus experience and sufficient wisdom. Now this does mean that we need to give less experience to chance, as they, in my view, are more creative. Too much knowledge can inhibit one. So can an engineer create beauty that can make you cry? Can't see many tears yet. I think the answer is that an engaged and collaborative team can, and engineers are certainly part of these teams. So back to our comparison with footballers. Every game, all season, is important. In our case, every building we work on. To keep at the top of the league, we must be ambitious, the right team for the job, and have passion for the beautiful game, or in our case, the mother of all arts, architecture. Every game should be beautiful, but every so often it will be a very special one, Nothing wrong with getting emotional. If footballers and their fans can cry, then so can engineers and the users of their buildings. Though perhaps not with tears of joy, I've certainly felt what Gaza felt here 26 years ago, after this famous semi-final incident. On at least 3 recent competition entries, I've come close to winning with what my collaborators and I believe knew were strong designs, only to be pipped to the post by some of the West Germanys of designers, some in this room here. Now, this can be heartbreaking when one feels one's cracked it, but competition is good in the creative process and we go forward stronger. So I think this short clip from filmed in the year I was born summarizes my message.
When architect and engineer are passionate about a shared ideal, when they can courageously but respectfully explore and test each other's limits, the result can be a masterpiece. It is this willing, energetic partnership that stretches technology's boundaries and forges bold ideas into reality. The fruit of that collaboration can make people's lives better. A useful, helpful, beautiful creation to enrich the life of a society.
I know that this business of getting various people to pull together and integrating, the designs or integrating, getting people to act harmonious together for that is a very difficult one, and it is psychological and political.
Possibly no time for questions there.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Okay. Can't guarantee any answers.
I was just wondering where you see the contractor in the collaborative design team.
Ideally right there. Ideally right there. We need all the important people. I mean, we have a problem in our way of procuring buildings, don't we, that it's very difficult to get them involved until because of money, because until later on, till after design vision. But ideally, absolutely. Day one, blank sheet of paper. It's not easy to achieve.
How do you balance a beautiful building and maintainability? Because they don't always marry quite well.
Well, okay. I mean, I think I always know when a design vision is working, or when a design process is working well, you haven't got these conflicts. Improving one of these items improves all of them. Of course, so you know you're on the right track. Possibly if you're finding everything always competing, you're on the wrong track. Perhaps the vision's wrong. Perhaps something's wrong. Of course, ultimately one does have a certain amount of balancing, but really there are many designs I've been involved with where things click, and they don't go up in cost. There's no fundamental need for that, but it does depend on whether you've got the vision right. Balancing otherwise is obviously different on every project. It's up to the client, and one has to put one's weightings in.
So what percentage of projects that you've worked on do you think the vision has been right?
Oh, I choose my projects. Quite a lot. Yeah, most of them I'd say. I'm picky.
What was the last project that made you cry?
Ooh. You mean literally cry? Okay. Oh, literal tears. I mean, I come to tear very easily on all sorts of things, but so quite a lot of them in different ways. But yeah, I don't know. Most emotional buildings, I've worked in my early career with Daniel Libeskind a lot, and there's nothing more emotional. I mean, his buildings are designed to be emotional. They're designed to be uncomfortable, and so they're very moving. And certainly when Daniel showed me around his empty museum in Berlin 20 years ago, it was very moving. But that's obviously designed to be emotional. But so I think the crying is put it aside. because we all know tears can come from all sorts of things. But certainly passion is, if I'm not passionate about a project, I find it very difficult to work on it. Thank you.
Francis's talk, it brought up lots of the questions that we've been thinking about in practice and are very current, I guess, in our everyday work of how do we approach the design process, how do you make sure that you safeguard that vision through the process you're working with. Yeah, very expansive set of questions it raised. I think definitely a very successful project demands that level of passion that can bring you to tears. Sometimes it is, as Francis says, tears of frustration as you're banging your head against a brick wall, and that's often you're actually the person you're generally fighting is yourself, and you're trying to square the circle and get through to the other side of those problems. I loved the turning design into an equation where you have to have all of these parts in place, otherwise if one of those things is at zero, then the whole thing falls apart. That was really, really good. As many good talks do, lots of the points touched on made me think about the projects that we're working on in very different ways. So there were many points that seemed very relevant.
It was very inspiring to hear his background. It made me feel very parochial as a West German. But I also really loved the way he showed us that mathematicians have a lot of creativity in them. I thought that was the most wonderful, emotional talk I've heard for a long time, delivered by an engineer. Yes, I totally agree. I also happen to agree with him about the Daniel Liebeskind Neue Museum in Berlin. It really, really made me cry, and other designers I went with. It is one of the most beautiful architectural refurbishment that two architects from different epochs have achieved together, and the engineer, of course, with it. I think we're not necessarily known for that, and you will find many critics about our style, but I know individually the contractors, the designers behind it, just put as much love, enthusiasm, passion into it as everywhere else.
I think the idea that he tried to formulate it in a mathematical way at the outset, I thought that was quite interesting and challenging. Having worked with Francis, I know that he's a very thought-provoking engineer. Yeah, I think that we probably come to lots of the same conclusions as Francis there. So the collaborative model, I think, is clearly a better way of designing. Obviously, you've got to communicate the vision, and as he pointed out, there has to be a design leader who can formulate those guidelines. But I think we'd probably endorse most of what he said there.
I loved it. I loved the talk, and I think in particular I love the way that he described nature at the end. I always think of nature as a kind of intricate machine that is built to create beauty through its simple rules, and I think he really nailed the essence of that in his talk. And I think, to me, when he talks about creating a clear design vision and making that as pure as possible and making sure that all of the different parties are coordinated to deliver that vision, I think what he's talking about is bringing the architectural design process closer to nature's design process. And I think the closer we can get to that, the more beauty we can make in the world. So.